All right, we're calling the meeting to order. It's the Finance Committee, March 23rd, 2023. So I call us to order and I need to assign a scribe. Okay. Lois, you're not, I'm letting you off the hook for sure. Guess what, Ray? He's already smiling. I think Amherst is also going to join us.
Dante's Inferno. I'll do it.
Thank you, Ray.
If it
And
makes you happy, Ray, you've gotten rave reviews for your minutes, if that makes you feel better.
excellent. Lois is smiling.
This mic's not working.
I think it's probably working. These aren't microphones there online, not amplification.
Oh, okay, fair enough.
Okay, third item on our agenda, we're moving right through it. Don't get too excited. Public comment. Okay. Anyone online? Charlie? Anyone
I
else?
have a question.
Carlin knows.
Which is, can we also have public comment at the end of the meeting or
Sure.
towards the end of the meeting? I think sometimes people, when they're at the meeting, all of a sudden have questions later on or want to make a comment.
We can do that. That sounds good. That's a good idea. We'll do that again. Okay, no hands raised online.
I thought,
Did
did Carlin, I thought, raise her hand?
I
for a
think
minute?
she put it down.
She put it down? Okay.
I was just saying hello, folks.
Oh, thank you.
Hello.
And we do have our two select board candidates with us tonight, so we appreciate you both attending. Okay, let's just talk briefly about the 2023 annual town meeting warrant articles that we have not yet closed out. I'm going to touch briefly on Article 17, which we have closed out. We voted that at our last meeting. And that vote was basically a tie.
Sorry, is Article 17 on the agenda, Madam Chair?
No, it's not. I'm just making a comment. It is not on the agenda for tonight. I'm just recapping briefly that it was a tie vote in favor of the school committee number. And then it was moved at our own guideline number where it was passed 6-8. And I would just like to
Lois, you're muted.
there, that means we will have to move an amendment to the school committee article at town meeting. And the motion, which passed favorably, honestly, because I changed my vote, isn't necessarily a vote in favor of the schools or in favor of our guidelines, but it is in favor of a full debate at town meeting. It's a vote in favor of moving an amendment so that our own guidelines can be fully discussed. And that was my thinking. So I'll just leave it at that. People look a little confused.
Yeah,
Yeah.
So the Amherst moved that that we provide a motion for our guideline number at town meeting. And
that is not what I moved.
what did you move, Amherst?
I moved affirmative. I moved that the Finance Committee recommend affirmative action at the number which Parashar gave me, which I don't have, which is our guideline number.
Right.
I did not make a motion that we should move on town meeting floor an amendment or anything of that kind. But this item is not on the agenda. I'm going to stop discussing it at this point.
Fine, thank you. Okay. Article 18, which is the Concord Public School Capital Projects. I have received information from Alexa Anderson, the chair of the Concord Public School Committee. And she has indicated that this is going to change fairly substantially. I'm not sure exactly what that means. And But her recommendation was that we didn't spend too much time on it because it will be changing.
Article 18.
18.
So it may change depending on what they decide at their Tuesday meeting. But
Right.
given that it's on the agenda, it probably is useful for us to have a discussion about it.
Yeah, because I
Right,
thought
'cause
about
they're
it in
also gonna have
preparation for the
discussion,
meeting,
so-
so,
Okay.
and
yeah.
it might actually inform their
Yes,
discussion.
no, absolutely.
Yeah, so that might be helpful so
we
they
should probably
kind of
have a
know where we
discussion
are
on
on
it.
it, yeah.
Okay. Chris, you want to start?
Sure, yeah, so, I'm very thankful to Don for the, kind of helping us think about this a little bit. This is something that we've seen year over year, and it's from a fiscal perspective, I view it as prudent to always put money away for maintenance and refurbishment. So to me, it sort of on its surface makes sense. However, I also think that there's a couple of other things going on, and they've been going on now for a couple of them a little while. One, we have a lot of fiscal constraint going on, so it does make sense perhaps to think about it more seriously when we're in the fiscal period that I described at the last meeting. So I do think it's worth a second thought before we simply say, yeah, okay, on the 900,000. So I think it would make sense, and I don't really understand how the school committee is approaching it, but if you're going to ask for what amounts to about $1 million, it was 300,000 last year and 780 or something in this one. There should be some sort of ROI analysis or something that says, here's why we're doing it. Here's the age of the boilers. My suspicion is that's what the school committee would want to see as well. I don't think they've seen that, which is why we haven't seen it either. So I do think we should ask for that. So that I would like to see that. And in particular, for other large projects like that going forward, I would ask for the same thing. I would expect that we should have that going forward. Don also recommended that we think about this as we do their budget in terms of zero base. And I think that's a good idea, again, for larger asks. If there's things that are small, I don't, if it's under 100 grand, I'm not really that interested in it. But if it's $1 million refurb for HVAC, I'm very interested, and tell me about that some more. So I think the zero base is a good idea going forward. The other issue that we have with Ripley, and we're going to have it with Peabody as well, is how these assets are going to be used in the future. And that was, again, something that I hadn't thought about. I actually haven't only been to the Ripley building, I think twice. And so it didn't, go in my head, oh yeah, this is an old school building that one of the preschools is moving out of, and that the administration is there, but it obviously is a lot more space than that. And what will it be used for? And is that the right building? Are we going to keep it? Are we going to refurb it? Those are interesting questions. The same thing with Peabody. What's going to happen to Peabody when the middle schools are consolidated? Then there's also the intersection of capital decisions with the town's sustainable goals, right? So for 2 years now, this capital plan has kind of run into that. So the Alcott requests for last year for new boilers ran into sustainability questions, which they then retreated and came back and said, we're going to spend 50 grand on a study, which they just received. This request to me is very similar, and it runs into the same issue of, well, what does the town really want to do for a sustainability perspective? And as I thought about that, I really think that that's a hard question for the schools, because those questions, or you would think that those are broader questions for the town's facilities. These are town assets, right? So how somebody needs to think about that is a big question. And I think, frankly, that the competencies, the skills and experience to do that are not resident within the schools or the school committee, nor would I expect them to be. That's not what the skill set that I would expect. I would expect that there's somebody at the town who could do that. So I'm also sort of starting to question why this budget is sort of carved off and sit into the schools when we keep having this intersection with sort of town goals. And are we better served? Is the school committee better served? Are the schools and the town better served to have that sort of decision-making and oversight moved into a central facilities function for the town? Because they're really town assets. And so that's kind of what I started to think about. Anyway, so those are my thinking. So as we come back to the question, what do you think about the 900,000? I would recommend I would like them to come back and show me a plan if they've got one for the Ripley for $1 million. I'd like to answer the question, what's going to go on with that building so I can assess whether that's a good investment or not, whatever they want to do there. If they can't do that, I would ask them how they'd like to proceed. Again, I'm a fan of giving you money for refurbishment and maintenance, but I think I need to know more about what you're going to spend it on. And I'd really like to know how you're going to coordinate that with the town and with Alcott. So with Alcott, I think it was a kind of a good idea that there was pushback, not from FinCom, it was from other parts of the town, because they did their analysis. I think it was an interesting analysis, and it showed that for around $500,000 or $600,000, not more than they thought perhaps, but you can get something that looks like it achieves both goals. It gives them what they need for a refurbishment. And we also learned that the boilers that are in there may be able to last another 20 years or so. So there was a good discussion about when you need to refurb it, what's the best way to do it, and how to get the cost down. And that was done through an outside consultant, because of course they have the skills, to sort of do that. So I think that might be a good idea for Ripley as well. But also this other question of what are we going to do with this building? So I think we need to put the brakes on and not run down the road and say, we're going to spend all this money on Ripley. Perhaps money could be used somewhere else where there's a better business case right now. But that's my thought. So that's a little bit wishy-washy, but that's where I am on it. Okay.
So I'll just, I think you said everything correct, except that last sentence. So, and I don't know whether you meant to imply that use the money elsewhere.
If they
But,
had something else.
well, so that
Yeah.
they've already given us a strategic plan or a capital plan.
Yeah, yeah.
And as I looked at it, and Don, you've looked into this, I don't see other capital projects on that plan for which they need money. And so if in fact they don't need this money, then
We
it
don't need to
shouldn't
spend it.
automatically be set at 900,000.
That's fine. I
So
agree with
that's
that.
all.
Yeah, yeah. I just didn't know if there was, if there was something that they could use instead. That's all I was talking about. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I'm fine. Save the money, save the money.
Yeah, I would just add that I think this practice was established at a time when the need was much greater, and the desire was to spread it out evenly across years. And thankfully, we've replaced all the schools. Once the middle school is done, that'll be the case. And our oldest school building is 19 years old in the Alcott School. And to your point, those boilers at the Alcott School should be good for another 20 years. So I think that the practice has simply outlived its usefulness, and now we need to adopt we recommend zero-based budgeting for capital. Beyond that, though, to echo your point, Chris, and go a little bit further, even on the Ripley School, if $1 million is needed for mechanicals, what else is needed in that building? Let's look at it in totality. Is this really a $10 million project coming to us in dribs and drabs? This is over 50-year-old building. It's by far the oldest building in the school system. It's also one that houses the fewest students. And so if we're thinking about where are there opportunities to be economized without impacting the students, this would be the first place I would look.
Mhm.
And so that's the genesis of my thoughts. Thanks.
Can I just get one clarification? We're talking Ripley boiler over here and Alcott here. The article is for Ripley, correct?
It is, but we learned.
I keep hearing.
Yeah,
Alcott
because
come up.
because last year, there was money put aside for Alcott.
Study on the
Remember
Alcott.
that? And then there were some folks who pressed against that, and the superintendent said, okay, what I'm going to do instead is put 300,000 for the electrification for Ripley. So
Right.
there was remember, that was the flip. But when they took 50,000 and they said, all right, we're going to use that to do a study for the boilers in Alcott to see what we could do. And they learned a lot through that process.
Right,
And
but
so we
this
haven't
part-
done that. No, I
This whole
understand that.
article, Right, is
Correct, but we
okay,
haven't
all right,
done that
yeah.
yet for Ripley. So I'm saying if you want to do something, you might want to do let's go figure out what we should do here
Gotcha.
first. That's
Thank
all
you
I was
very
saying.
much for
Yeah, yeah.
clarification.
And just one final thought. I think a member at our last meeting correctly pointed out that we need to stay in our lane and not be second guessing line items.
Yeah, I don't want to
And-
do
And I
that.
agree with that wholeheartedly. I do know that through the capital allocation process generally throughout America, right, wherever it's done, there is always a give and take. There's always a questioning and looking for economic justification. And also, this body is the one that represents the entire town. And my mind goes to, gee, is it more important that we do this, or is it would that money be better spent on sidewalks, or is
Yeah.
there something that the town needs somewhere else that's actually a higher priority at this moment?
And
So
I
that's where we're
I think that's a good point. I would think as well that typically the school committee is doing this before we are, right? So they're having their own discussion, and that's what I would expect to rely upon. I think in this case, that hasn't happened yet. So that's why I'm saying, can you show me something here if you want me to do something with it? Or even better, let the school committee do that, and then we can see what they looked at. What were the criteria that you used?
One of the things I was thinking about as you were talking is that we have this capital planning group where the town and the school, but it's the threshold is $5 million.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if it would be possible or even desirable to really look at the town and the Concord Middle School, CMS, their needs in terms of capital, if it should be looked at jointly. You know, where we have the tier 1 and we have tier 2. Because I think you're right in terms of maybe there schools where it might be the town could
Right.
go in and look at it and understand what the
Right.
situation is. Everybody would be marching together in
Hmm.
terms of zero-based budgeting and how we're going to manage projects in the future. I think we could be looking at that, but it's just an idea so that it kind of complements what the over 5 million group is supposed to be looking at. And timing those. And why shouldn't we be doing that with the CMS projects as well as the town projects for the tier 1 and tier 2 projects?
I think, and I know Amherst wants to talk, but let me just follow up on this question. When the long-term capital plan task force or whatever, right? I think the notion was come together with tier 3, but also tier 2. And I'm looking to Gail and Bob, because I know there's been a lot of conversations around revising, refining our capital planning process. Maybe you guys can give us what I think is a positive update in terms of the direction that you guys are heading.
Sure. Last summer, I met with all the town department heads and we put together a capital plan, using a little more time than had been done in the past and seemed to work well. So I visited the schools and say, wouldn't you like to join it? And obviously it's an informal discussion, but they thought absolutely it should be discussed. In terms of the way you do it now for 900,000 being debt, that's just wrong. The decision as to whether it should be debt or cash should be made here by finance. You know, you don't want to, if you have a 700,000, 100,000, 100,000, as was done in the past, you don't want to borrow $900,000. That makes no sense. You pay cash for the 200s and maybe you have to borrow for the 700. But I do think it'd be much better for all of you to take it together holistically and then to let the financing piece sort of stand aside. And it can still retain all the authority. You know, school committee cannot lose any authority by doing it that way. And just a last comment, because I know some people had this question. The 900,000 at this coming annual town meeting would be, if approved, would be borrowed, say, May of 2024. It will have zero financial impact on the FY24 budget because Concord doesn't borrow till the end of the fiscal year, so it has nothing to do with it. The 900,000 approved last year is going to be borrowed in another month or two, just to clear that up.
Thanks, Bob. Anyone else? Oh, Amherst.
Yeah, I had one question. I think, Christine, you said that there was a conversation about Concord Public Schools capital budget last year, and they were told to come back with a report. Did I understand that correctly? Because if I'm looking at last year's warrant, Article 19 was the Concord Public Schools capital project, and that article passed by more than a 2/3 majority.
Yeah, it was
And-
before that. Yeah. So what happened? I don't remember the exact, I thought they made a change at, between the warrant and annual town meeting. So there was a switch. If you looked at the list of projects that they put forward in the 900,000, I think it would have included in the warrant, Amrith, I think it would have included a project that they ended up changing. So they still had a list of 900,000, but they changed it because there was pushback from the sustainable folks in the community about the boiler choice that they were going to make at Alcott. And so they took that 350, they split it up into 50 grand for a consulting study and 300 for electrification or preparation for electrification of HVAC at Ripley. And that 300 is the precursor to this 750 or so. It's additive. So that's actually $1 million project, what they're talking about at Ripley.
So the presentation which they gave said that they were going to do carpet and tile replacements for 55,000, high efficiency boiler at Alcott for 350, integrated playground at Thorough for 55,000, flooring replacements for 140, paving and sidewalk for 200, and contingency of 100 for a total of 900,000. I
Right,
don't
so
know what I don't know what was moved at town meeting. This may have been the presentation during the public hearing rather
Yeah.
than the presentation at town meeting. I don't know that for sure. But the second thing which I wanted to say is this time's article says the funding will support the installation of air supply heat pumps in the preschool area of Ripley, consistent with the town's sustainability goals. Does that address your concern about whether or not this is the same issue as last year?
No, so I know what they're talking about, but I still
Okay.
think that something like they did at Alcott, where they actually got an outside expert to come in and look at what the costs are going to be, what the options are, Amrith, right, to replace it. So they haven't done that I've seen for Ripley, right? So we
Okay.
sent them a series of questions on Ripley. We got, I think, one answer around the age of things, but we didn't get the other answers because I don't think the analysis has been done yet. I'm not
Well,
surprised.
and
it hasn't.
in fairness, we only asked for that one question to help with today's
I didn't.
discussion because the rest of it was going to take longer. That's what they told us last week.
Yeah, but I'm
So
gonna.
that's why we only got
How
Alexa,
long is it going to take?
Alexa's on the
Okay.
line. Yeah.
Yeah, do you guys want some background?
Sure.
Sure,
Um,
let them background.
So I have anyway, so what happened with the Ripley project was that the sustainability director at the time, Kate Hanley, after a 2013 review of projects that were, or sorry, a 2013 review that identified schools, or it might have been all municipal buildings, I don't precisely know, identified like carbon offenders, if you will. And I could be getting this all wrong. I'm not a sustainability expert, but a 2013 outside independent study was done that identified projects that were ripe, if you will, for sustainability upgrades. Ripley was identified in that study. In 2019, Kate Hanley, the town's sustainability director, applied for a Green Communities grant. So not the school district, not at the direction necessarily of the school committee, and not at the direction of the superintendent, but the sustainability director herself applied for this grant specifically for the Ripley boilers. That grant, to the tune of $200,000, was granted. We won that grant. We were awarded that grant. The reason you see the Ripley project on this capital plan is because if we do not use that grant by some period of time, I don't know if it's this year or next year, but it's not 2 or 3 years from now, we lose that 200,000. The problem was when that a grant was applied for by Kate Hanley, town sustainability director, there was not background work done that later determined upon award of the grant that in order to put in the heat pumps that they specified in the grant, it required $745,000 of electrical upgrades because the Ripley building is so old and all of the infrastructure for the most part is original. So again, I think, Amrith, you see the clause in there that you identified to align with the town's sustainability goals. That's why the town applied, the school district did not. And so the town said, we got this grant, it's 200,000. And then the schools were left to determine, okay, so if we want to use it, we need to spend 745 or whatever the number is to be able to use it. So I'm speaking for myself. To me, that leaves us in kind of a hamstrung position. Does that make sense? And that's speaking on me, Alexa, not on behalf of the school committee, but the history is correct. I'm just saying, I'm just sort of giving you my personal interpretation.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So to summarize, one arm got 200,000.
Yep.
The other arm basically found out, geez, if we want to use the 200,000 for which we got this,
We got to
gotta
spend
700,000. And
correct.
therefore, we're going to go ahead and spend the 700,000. Is that kind of what I'm hearing? That's what's
Well,
happening?
we felt that, I feel like there is a very vocal, again, so now I'm speaking on behalf of me, so maybe it's not even appropriate that I
No,
speak.
I'm just, Alexa, I'm just trying to understand, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So the 700,000 has not been spent yet, correct?
Correct, no. So in order,
Okay.
so
So
we
we
have a
could,
choice to make.
Yep.
We can accept the grant. And in
Right.
order to do that, it necessitates this $750,000 spend.
Sure.
Or we can return the grant to the Green Communities Organization.
So can I ask a question, a factual
Sure.
question? Is it possible to use some of the grant to do the type of analysis that was done at Alcott?
No.
Okay. So we
No.
have to spend. out of
No,
our
it
own-
was very specific.
Oh.
It's for a heat pump, period.
Okay. Thank
And
you.
Alexa, the
Yeah.
300,000 that was granted in last year's article, that was for the Ripley, for preparation for the Ripley.
Correct?
Is that spent or is that still?
It is not spent.
It's not spent. So we have that as well. Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
And also, I mentioned this, my committee has been messaged on this, as well as Parashar and Peggy. We will be revisiting the entirety of the capital plan on Tuesday at our March 28th meeting.
Suresh.
Yeah, if I can add, keeping the market conditions in mind, right now we are bidding projects for HVAC replacement for start of May 2024, so that the ESSER funding can be used for some of the projects. And we're finding it, people don't even want to bid the projects because they don't have any manpower or equipment available, as the earliest they are interested in a project would be sometime for starting in May of 2024. And I have another big project of similar project of a $5 million value for heat pumps and all kinds of HVAC work. And we're looking at 2025 because there's no availability of equipment and electrical equipment, as well as the electrical upgrades that requires till sometime in fall of 2024, the earliest you can think about them, because they are just not available. So even if you assign money and you think you're gonna get a grant, but you're not gonna be able to use the matching grant if it has a limitation of time of, sometime for 2024.
May I ask another question in that case?
Cameron.
Yeah, so Alexa, a question for you, or maybe
Okay,
I don't know whether this is possible or not. Given what Suresh just said, is it possible for us to apply for an extension on this grant and cite the reason that it's hard to get people to actually do the work? We would like to do the work. Can we have another whatever period of time you consider to be reasonable? That's the first part of the question. And the other, before you start answering this one, what other funds have been voted at previous town meetings for capital improvement projects of this kind that have not yet been spent? You mentioned that something which was voted last year has not been spent. What are those monies which we can probably go and round up and see whether they're going to fund some of these? Because if they've not been spent, those projects didn't rise to the level of urgency. Are these projects which are being proposed more urgent, and should we use that money for these things instead?
okay, I'm gonna do my best.
Okay.
First, I believe Actually, I don't even know. I will have to check on the extension. I think in like the real back recesses of my mind, we might have already applied for an extension. I could also be making that up. So I'm gonna ask on that, but you know, sometimes there's somewhere in the back of my mind that makes me think that. But I will check. That's an easy thing to check. I don't know if we can extend. With respect to unused monies from previous years, I am almost willing to bet my children on the answer being no. In a meeting this week with the superintendent, that 300,000 was specifically outlined because it is tethered to, there's efficiencies to be gained by doing the entirety of the project at once, right? So we knew that the additional capital was coming because we plan these things out years in advance. And as you guys were speaking about earlier, we did shuffle some things around last spring. So we knew that this was going to be a two-step project, and the entirety of the amount that was required with respect to electrical upgrades exceeded the 900,000, which is why we elected to put it over 2 years. But the intention was never to do a phased project. It was just to ensure that we had the capital ready to eventually do the project. And again, I think if we there's some reevaluation to be done on our part.
Thank you.
That helpful?
Yes, thank you. Very helpful.
Okay, any more questions or comments?
One quick last.
Yes,
question to
Suresh.
Bob.
Suresh, into the microphone. So that.
Bob, you mentioned that there will be the $900,000 from last year will be going in for now this spring. But if that's not been spent, are you still gonna be borrowing that?
Well, I double checked with the schools, and as of 2 months ago, they said, yes, they would need it.
Okay.
So
Okay,
yes, we will borrow it. You do have to spend the money within a certain amount of time, but a year or two is okay if it's a delay.
thank you.
Any other comments or questions? We've all heard of a Trojan horse before. $200,000 Trojan horse is going to cost us 700,000. But it does sound like a worthwhile project in the long run for sustainability. If we, Chris, I thought you brought up a good point of what are we going to do with Ripley? But it's there, it's an asset. So what do we want to do next steps on this article? Bring it back at our next regular meeting, which is April 27th.
They're going to meet next week. Is that right?
Yeah, they're meeting
Okay.
Tuesday.
Yeah, so I mean,
Rush.
Perfect timing.
April, well, that'll be 3 days
Close.
before town meeting, right? So that means it won't be in the report if we
It won't be in the
wait until
report,
then.
No.
So
Okay.
no, it is. I'm just saying, if we wanted to, we could always we could call a quick meeting if they give us the information and
Sure.
we're, so let's see what happens at their meeting and then we can decide if we want to wait or not. That would be
Okay.
my thought.
But that sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, so we'll just table it for now. And our next item on the agenda is Article 25, and Rick Laughlin just walked in the door.
Good time. Well, I just came from our econ meeting and we voted unanimously not to move Article 25. We appreciate your thoughts on planning, budgeting, taxes, et cetera.
Sorry, could you lean forward and speak into the microphone, sir?
Is your green light on?
Yeah. We appreciate everything said by your committee on planning, budgets, taxes, et cetera. And it's a unanimous vote not to move the article at this point.
Okay.
So can I just ask a question? So that's for this year.
Yes.
Was there discussion of what might happen for next year, which is where the majority of the money might be required?
Well, we're going to review, we're going to fine tune our plan. We're going to certainly look at our budgets. We're going to increase outside sources of funding,
Yep.
et cetera. So we recognize that next year could be a similar situation. So we have to do everything to find other funds.
And is it possible to start the conversation with the state for next year now so that we?
It's already
they're-
begun.
they're- okay, perfect.
The meeting
Thank you.
tomorrow for
That's
$2
good,
million.
'cause that way the town, all the towns can
Yeah.
plan
Yeah.
properly. Thank you.
I just have a comment. So, I've been thinking about it. And I don't know if this will be helpful to you as you think through it, but this is sort of where I landed. So I think everybody is very grateful for the work that this committee is doing. And I think people will want to support some sort of a celebration. I think the thing that surprised people was your price tag. So, so a $2 million price tag is now moving sort of into a realm of big capital, big spend for us. And there isn't really a good understanding of what the benefits are going to be, other than obviously it's a nice thing. It's a good thing. It celebrates Concord and our history, which we think is great. So it became hard to sort of figure out, well, how do I say yes to a $2 million request when I don't really have a good sense, and neither does your committee yet, of exactly how it's going to be spent and exactly what the benefits would be. Although you can imagine that there are some. Personally, I still don't think there would be $2 million worth of benefits to the town from that, knowing how the receipts tax comes back to the town. So we have 200,000 from the state, right? Is that correct?
Yes,
So you
that's
have
in
that as a
that's
starting
here,
point.
yes.
And then you have a share of this 2 million that we hope the state is going to provide to the 4 or 5 towns that are involved.
Well, there's actually, we'll know better tomorrow, but there's 2 million that is a discussion tomorrow for Concord, Lexington and Lincoln. And then there was a Simon Cataldo Barrett bill, which was for public safety, which was another number. I think it was $1 million,
Okay,
which
so there could be some good funds coming
Yeah,
from that,
yeah.
which would be very helpful. So at this point, is that enough to get you started, right? The promises, the 200,000 plus what you have from then, because I think once you can get through, once you, are more developed in your ideas and where other funding can come from and so forth, then I think you'd have a good, if you needed more funds still, I think then you'd have a better discussion at the town than where we sort of are now. And if you needed to have a special town meeting to make that request, then I would suggest that's what you do, rather than trying to rush into this annual town meeting process, where I think the answer would be no. I know it would have to be no for me, even though I support the idea. So because it's just not ready yet, the idea isn't cooked enough yet.
well, I think, Chris, we're heading back to, remember, our budgets were estimates in many respects
Yes,
because we were
yeah.
still very early in the process. So we need to do a lot of fine tuning on our budgets. We need to really move on our fundraising situation, which I've talked to 2 or 3 fundraising people in town. And the one question they always ask, do you have a plan? So we have to fine tune our budget, our plan. And, we're still 2 years away. I mean,
Yeah.
people talk about, well, in 1975, they started 7 years earlier. We still have plenty of time to do the right things and figure out the funding and what a proper plan is. So
Okay.
we appreciate your comments. We also recognize the fact that, the town has some fiscal issues that are going to probably go on for a few years,
Right.
and we're caught up in that to some degree. So we have to act accordingly.
And to be clear, the budget that you presented, I was fine with that. At a high level, 2.5 years out, it's not gonna be down and there's gonna be movement. My concern was always, we're tight on cash this year. If we find the cash and we don't know what we're doing the following year, it's sunk costs and we're almost gonna have to, and you'll see later today, we're probably gonna hit an override if we don't make some changes in a couple of years. That's the biggest thing on my mind, right? Not the celebration, et cetera, but what are the trade-offs that we as a town have to make? Right, that's all.
I am very encouraged that the state legislature is starting to get involved. You get 200,000 from the state, ARPA money from the town. So, a good chunk of money to get kicked off. And you gave us a budget, the $2 million budget might be a little high in the long run. But the funding plan, I think, is what's really missing. So detailing up what you're really planning, maybe working with some higher level professional staff at the state level, for this type of event, and public funding. I think it's all going to come together, I think, within the next year, a lot more than it is right now. I think I agree with Chris on that.
Are you still going to look for ARPA funding, or no? I didn't think you were going to keep looking for ARPA.
Well, I think it's still on the table. We haven't,
Yeah. Okay.
it's between, right
Carrie
now,
has
it's,
to look at it.
the town manager and the
Yeah.
select board are dealing with the opera issue. So
Okay.
I think the other thing, tomorrow's meeting will give us a good indication what's happening in the town of Lexington. We really haven't had a lot of communication with them. We might hear what some of their problems are and how much money they think they need and what their budgets are. So I think we will learn a lot tomorrow from the state and the surrounding towns, especially Lexington. So
And that 2 million, Boston doesn't have their fingers on the 2 million, or are they getting a separate?
well,
I'm just concerned about,
comment Senator Barrett made in his email is that he covers a lot of towns. He's involved with not only Lexington, Concord
Yep.
and Lincoln, but Arlington and Cambridge. And, you start going down the battle road of,
Down the pike.
we have a lot of towns are involved. So,
yeah,
but I think the groundwork's been set that the state is willing to put some money up, and it's gone as far as the governor now. So that's the good news.
On the ARPA stuff, I think there is and should be a fair amount of competition for that money. And if Kerry decides to, and I know it's her decision to give a large chunk of money to the celebration now, I would have some concerns about that, which I would express to her, because I think there's other things that come ahead of it. But again, so I'm hoping you sort of have enough money to kind of get started here without touching the ARPA stuff, because I think there's other things in the town that should come before it. So that's where I am.
I have one question. Are you working at all with the national park?
Yes.
You are?
Simone Monteleone she was at the meeting tonight when I
Mhm.
left. She's come to most of our meetings along with the Colonel who runs the National Guard over on Everett Street. They participate in our meetings. So yes.
Are they planning something themselves?
Oh, yes, they have.
Mm.
Well, they have two issues going, not only the 2025, but then 2026, which becomes the national situation. So they've got a couple of years that they're dealing with.
Okay.
No, but we have to work very closely with her because the battle road issues.
Yeah.
Her people are involved in 3 towns. So yes, she's involved.
Okay.
Thank you, Rick.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Peggy, I got
Thank
a
you.
comment. So I started to ask the question last week. It's going to be to Gail. So thank you very much. I do appreciate it. Of if these funds could have been used for other things, because I know a lot of people have talked to me since last meeting and said, hey, you're going to support 600,000, but not the schools, right? So I just can you comment on if that money could be used from schools? Because I know a lot of public thinks they're interchangeable, and I want clarification for everybody that's watching, what the case is with that money.
you need a microphone.
What the ask is and what the spend would be for. There are broad categories. We did take the lost revenue, so it does give us flexibility, but it would be hard to say it could be used because we don't know what they would be asking it to be used for. And that is a decision town manager and select board. So I think it would become a discussion as to, is it a one-time use? Is it continuing? I think with the ARPA funds, you try to be very careful that it is for one-time sort of discrete uses. So you're not creating a cliff at the end of it, because it does have a finite life.
Not
So
adding
I think
personnel.
Right. So if it was supporting the personnel, that would be a hard.
Right. So
Yeah,
yes,
yeah,
absolutely. So thank you for that clarification. It was more for everybody that has made comments like, oh, can we just switch this out for this, which is
Yeah. it's
not
so
something
easy.
we-
Yeah.
technically want to do.
It's a
Thank
very
you.
good question.
Yep.
Greg. Any other questions on the town meeting warrant articles? Now, one other comment I'll just make, usually we are making comments at town meeting and distribute out assignments to members to get up and comment on warrant articles. We Parashar and I and Lois discussed this earlier. We are thinking that only Article 17 warrants a FinCom presentation, which Parashar would make on the guidelines. If people feel otherwise, please let me know. That means you would like to make that presentation. And there may be a few others as we get closer to town meeting where we might want to prepare a presentation just in case. But and the moderators here, even a 2-minute presentation is not 2 minutes because it requires people to get up, walk to the podium, shuffle around a little bit, say their 2 minutes, answer any questions, et cetera, et cetera. So it really, if we don't need to make a presentation, and most of our articles have been pretty straightforward, without a lot of comment, without a lot of discussion. So I'm inclined to put our effort into Article 17 and 17 only. Yes, Lois. You're on mute.
Yep, I know. That accurately reflects the conversation that we had. There's just one thing I want to put in place as a placeholder. We're going to move on in the agenda to a discussion of what's going to be in the Finance Committee report. And in the course of that, I mean, Parsha has prepared up some slides that he'll talk through and that we can answer questions about. There may be a justification, a really solid reason for the Finance Committee to make a brief presentation at town meeting that is not tied to a particular article, but deals with some overall issues. And that's something that we talked about giving some thought to down the road, having a conversation with Carmen about. We don't need to decide that today, but I just didn't want the committee to get the impression that a group of us were strongly suggesting we only talk about one article. I think we talked about not having a lot of back and forth and up and down and not taking up a lot of time at town meeting that would be distracting, and focusing instead on the major issue that we're dealing with. But that doesn't preclude some other presentations at town meeting. So
thank you, Lois. Correct. Okay. Let's move on to agenda item number 5, the Finance Committee Annual Report.
I guess, Lois, do you want me to pull up the slides and you just want to walk? Folks
yeah,
through
let's
the
just start
slides?
doing that. I don't think we need, we can talk about, let's talk about the substance with those slides, and then we can talk briefly about the procedure and report on the status.
Okay, so there you go. Let me know when you want to turn the slides.
Yeah. Okay, you want me to do this? I will be happy to. Next slide.
Sorry, are these slides in our packet?
No,
not.
we don't.
They will
We
circulate
literally
now.
generated them this afternoon. We'll distribute a set afterward.
Okay, thank you.
Amara. It's only 3 of them. It's a short presentation.
Got it. Thanks.
So this was just to give FinCom an overview of the substance of the report without getting bogged down in the table of contents. The report highlights that there are some real areas of strength, financial strength, that Concord still has. Our bond rating, our highly funded pension liability, which distinguishes us among many other towns. We're doing very well there. The way we've handled OPEB, the fact that we're still going to be able to hit our free cash target at the end. We're ending fiscal 23 with our free cash within our free cash target, and we are expecting. We're projecting that we'll still have free cash just within the target as of the end of 24, and that we also are continuing to fund our operating budgets within the levy limit. That's the good news. The areas of concern that we've identified as we've looked at the projections, as we've looked at the full picture, are significant. First of all, there's been the revenue projections are not robust. Secondly, the costs associated with the major budgeting entities across the board are projected to increase at a higher rate than our revenues. And when your costs are increasing more rapidly than your revenues, the problem is apparent. We are seeing debt service, total debt service, go up It's been increasing, and the projections are that it will increase. Our levy capacity is not going to be robust going forward. And our free cash at this point is projected to essentially be gone by fiscal year 29. We're actually looking at needing to get Prop 2.5 overrides for our operating purposes as early as fiscal year 26. So it's sobering. So as that, our conclusion in the report is that we should be looking at making substantial changes to the underlying cost structures and also looking at opportunities to increase revenue growth, because otherwise we're looking at Prop 2.5 overrides by fiscal year 26. So that, if you want to flip ahead, Harsha, that you can see that in these charts. You can see the increase, how the gap between projected revenues and expenses keeps growing. And you can also see how, absent changes, we're going to be looking at overrides. So the Finance Committee recommendations are going in the report are going to be to continue to manage to our objectives, and this first section of the slide really states what we have been, what our guiding principles have been all along. Our recommendations for continuing to meet those basic underlying principles, those basic objectives, are continued fiscal restraint, to give ourselves a chance perhaps for the revenues to increase and for free cash to recover. You know, we're not even entirely post-pandemic. I just got over COVID again, but our revenues have certainly not recovered fully to pre-pandemic levels. And we are asking, the town has made the decision to increase its taxes on individual taxpayers substantially to fund the new middle school. We're hoping that our recommendation for limiting headcount growth and deferring resizing, or at least certainly very carefully analyzing capital projects, will be accepted. And we're looking at all of the budgeting entities and asking them to be sensitive to these issues. The reality is that the Concord Public Schools are the single largest budgeting entity in the city, in the town of Concord, and that its 5-year projected growth has a real impact on the issues that we're seeing. So we're hoping that there can be ways to slow that growth while we're working our way through the situation. So that is, a summary of what the final report is going to say, and I'm sure everyone will be thrilled to get it in their mailboxes. Barsha, did you want to add anything?
No, I think you did a brilliant job, and I would nominate you for the opening.
No way.
Are you making a motion to that effect, Barsha? I'll second it.
No way. Now he just wants me because I'm the smaller target.
Any question?
I'm coming down with a cold.
Yeah, right.
Yes, Don.
I took a look back. Thank you for that. This is really excellent. I think it, as I would say, as a voter, as a citizen prior to joining FinCom, I was always looking for this sort of a, where are we in the big picture? Because when you're only looking at articles on their own merits, everything is important. We need to know where we are in the totality. When I looked back at 2013 and 2003 and just looked at our percent of spend, the fastest growing category of our spend is debt service, which has grown over 20 years at 6.5% per year over 20 years. It really has taken off, and it now is crowding out the other spending. This year, it's almost about 9% of our total budget, whereas it used to be in the low single digits. So, and I guess the question would be for Gail, do you know what it might look like with including the middle school? Because I think the message here is we can't afford level services going forward. We're hitting the levy limit. We have some excluded debt. But the percentage of our total dollars that's going to debt service is now going to be in the low teens versus the low single digit. That just means that what's left over is, even if it wasn't growing, revenues weren't growing more slowly than expenses, what's left over would not cover a level services once we have so many dollars spent on debt service.
Yeah, one thing, and I'll let Bob and Gail talk. The numbers up there included debt service for the middle school.
They
Okay,
did.
they did. But the other thing I'll just say, Lindsay prepared a really good analysis to show, and it was in our pre-read.
Yeah.
About the changing demographics of Concord.
Yeah.
And I think that's something to keep in mind, and maybe we borrow one or two slides from there too. Because putting it into context, for me, the analysis you did really hit home. In terms of affordability, there are plenty of folks that can afford the extra tax increases. Don't get me wrong. The question is what happens to others that can't, and then what happens to the town and the character of the town when they leave, and that's been happening.
Am I correct that the subtext of this presentation is they've been leaving will become faster?
I don't know. We'll see when Lindsay walks through the analysis she did. We can all
Seems-
draw our own conclusions as to what's been happening.
I would just comment that on terms of debt, since 2003, we've replaced every school in town.
Yes.
So, in just 20 years. And that's, that's a tough situation.
And for one of them, we had no state funding.
For the biggest one, we had
Biggest one, we had
no
no
state funding,
funding.
highest dollar amount
Right.
and higher interest rates. So, no question.
That to me is
It-
all valid, but has nothing to do with the point, which is
Mhm.
that it's consuming mid-teens percentage of our total spend.
Absolutely.
With that's the point. I'm
Yeah.
making. Not the merit
Absolutely.
of it with spending.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's outside the levy limit. So when we're talking about operational overrides, it doesn't affect that,
That's
but
right.
it still comes out of your pocket big time. Yeah. Lindsay, you look like you were getting ready to say something.
No.
Okay.
I have a question if Lindsay is
Yeah.
not. So there's a point in the presentation which Lois made, which said, we're going to request, I don't know whether these are the words you use, but I'm going to paraphrase for my own benefit. We're going to request that departments not add headcount because that's a significant portion of our growth, or what was the exact words you used, Lois?
I can
think
pull
that
up slide.
I think that's when we were talking about ARPA
Li-
funding.
Limiting headcount growth, I
Yeah.
think was what we talked about, not, the part of the subtext here, Amrit, and I think maybe what part of the point you're getting to is there's a core underlying decision to be made here. Then that is, do we grow services in all of the budgeting entities? Do services
I-
grow? Do they, what is the cost to sustain them at the current levels? Or do we actually have to face cutting services?
Yeah, so
Um,
where I was going to was specifically a recommendation, and I want to know whether we want to go this far. Where I used to live in Sterling, we were in a similar position where headcount growth was happening. In the name of level services, we were having headcount growth because population was increasing, as an example. One of the things which we did in response to that was to explicitly require that all new headcount require an explicit vote at town meeting, giving the control for headcount growth back to town meeting. Do we want to go that far, at least for some number of years? Because I'm sincerely hoping that the crunch we're looking at in these slides is going to be one which passes relatively, well, maybe in 5 years. do we want at least for 5 years to control headcount growth and give the town the control on that?
Well, Amherst, I don't know if the other town you're talking about had the same form of government that we have, which is the very strong manager form of government.
Yes,
And, whether it's headcount or something else, I'm not sure we want to start micromanaging.
no, it's not micromanaging. It is asking whether we want to have whether we want to give town meeting control on growth of headcount. We have it implicitly on budget.
Right. Well, maybe that's a good vector for us to start tracking.
The issue is that once you've hired a person, it becomes level service.
That's right.
Do we want to hand the control to town and say, before you add the person, town meeting votes on it?
How
Brian?
many people live in Sterling?
6,000 people, I believe, 6,000 registered voters.
Yeah, it's a smaller town, Amherst, and
Did you say 6 or 7 people?
6,000.
Oh,
And they're all
Um,
employees of Sterling.
The employer.
wasn't.
That's not a place I'd
yeah.
that's not a place that's not a place I'd want to go right now. I think that feels extreme. Which doesn't mean our situation isn't serious. Working on the report this year confirmed for me that it is. But I don't see how that works. And leaving it to town meeting means leaving the choices of how the work is allocated to the messy democratic system that I always defend. But when you're getting to the question of whether the roads are being paved and whether the dog licenses are being issued, I don't know if that should be happening by popular vote. I don't know that town meeting is the right vehicle to manage at that level of detail. So my instinctive reaction is, it feels extreme to me. And it feels like something that if we're going to be considering it, we'd be considering it in a couple of years if the trajectory hasn't bent, if we haven't been able to address the problem within our existing structures.
Unfortunately, by that time.
Brian.
Can I?
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
Okay,
so
thank you.
So I tend to agree with Lois on that perspective. But Lois, I wanted to go back to your summary. I thought you had identified, one of the areas that we want to try to explore is revenue growth as being one of the, approaches that we would need to sort of apply or at least hope to apply. I want to come back to Don's comment. I think at the last public hearing, I was moved by your comment, and I feel like a summary of or a reflection on that comment, or maybe a summation of that comment might be really helpful in the context of this overall summary, because I think when last year, I think it was when the town moved to vote against the zoning bylaws, there were really good, compelling reasons to do so, just based on certain circumstances, and I had voted against it as well, just full disclosure. But the point here is we need to revisit that, not in the same specific, explicit, discrete way that we were approaching it at the town meeting prior, but I do think if you were to summarize that in the report somehow, let's reflect on that now that we are where we are, and perhaps we can start thinking about other ways or other creative ways that might help stimulate a conversation where the folks that were against the zoning bylaws might be included into that conversation a bit more, just given the circumstances that we're under. So I just want to say thank you for the comment. It's got me thinking about how I voted on that. in that circumstance, I feel good about that vote, but I feel like there's work to be done there, and growth is going to get us out of this, not voting on who's going to get hired and who's not going to get hired. So that, I just want to put that out there. And if we could do something to include that in the report,
I
maybe
just
that might
made,
be
I
helpful.
just made a note of that. So I think in the.
Yeah,
sure
that's a good
We'll
point.
wordsmith it later, but in the recommendation, something along the lines of rigorous effort across town entities to drive sustainable revenue.
And we could actually name it. We can see in the model. So I think if we were able to increase revenue by 2 to 3 million, that helps a lot.
Yep.
It's not a huge number, right? So I think we could name it as well. It's get people thinking about it to
Well,
say whether it's,
What would you say, name it, meaning call it out
I
or?
call it,
Oh, yeah,
out. Say
fair
if we could, because we can see when we hit the 2.5, right?
Yeah.
So.
Eric,
Yeah, that's a good point. Really good point.
So the slides look great, Lois. The tenor of the presentation, and it's stated explicitly at one point, is we don't want to go down the road of overrides. Overrides are bad. And I'm certainly no fan of higher taxes in general, but an override to me is one tool to consider. We're saying at one point we need to grow revenues. An override is a tool to grow revenues, and it's a very democratic tool. The taxpayers, by necessity, have to vote for it. So I don't know that I necessarily have a question other than to say we may not want to characterize unless it's a policy of the town or a policy of this committee that maybe I'm not aware of. An override isn't necessarily something to be scared of and something that we want to recommend against. It's one tool that the town has at its disposal to grow revenues.
So, but one of the first objective that we've had on the finance committee, at least as long as I've been here, is actually exactly that, right? So if I share the screen again, it actually says keep a level of excess levy limit capacity to avoid general overrides.
Okay.
So
that helps.
hopefully that answers your question, but that's been the primary goal at the top of the other
But
objectives.
Concord has
And
had
Eric,
what has happened.
When was the last time?
yeah, but not a long time.
we're running operational overrides, probably 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, something like that. Every year.
Yeah.
And it's just a real challenge. Now we've been spending our way back to the override level. And is an override tax increase any more than, a tax increase within the levy limit? No. But yes, Don.
I just wanted to say two things. First, Brian, thank you for that. And I was thinking if we could harness all of the passion of all of the supporters of the schools around increasing revenue, we would have a juggernaut here, and that would be awesome.
Yeah.
Okay, now I lived in a town in California that always had override votes. And what happened, well, it's a very unpredictable source of funding. They don't always pass.
Exactly.
And so you can't make hiring decisions based on vote for spending that may not be there next year. And secondly, it spawned umpteen little votes for the additional funding for the fire department, additional funding for the ambulances, all over the place. And you would go to the election day and there'd be 23 overrides on the ballot. And it's not a form of government that
We just have one.
I understand that, but
Yeah.
it doesn't mean that somebody can't move a warrant article to raise funds as an override vote for a specific purpose.
True.
And that's what happened. And so it's just not something, sort of a model that I think we want to emulate here.
Yeah, I agree with that. And that was the point that I was going to make in response, Eric. You can't assume they're going to pass. So you end up in a very insecure situation. You end up in a situation where managing the town becomes very difficult to do. You don't have the predictability. In my view, they are a tool for raising revenue, but they are a last resort. kind of tool. There, if we can't come up with anything else that makes sense in time. One of the things that the points that Brian made, and I think it's maybe Gail can speak to it. Isn't it true that we used to find revenue through new growth that we haven't been getting since the
Exactly.
pandemic? Am I remembering?
Not as much, right? So we have it, but we don't have as much.
But we do have
Exactly.
we do have the state MBTA zoning regulation, which is going to require us to upzone some areas near the T stations, either Concord or West Concord, which could result in new growth. Well, it's supposed to result in new growth, but that's not going to be up and running in 2 years. So, but yes, it's new growth that's slowed down. We had the Muse up in West, up right on the Acton line. That was a huge new growth generator. Anyway. D.
I'm wondering if one of us should be charged with talking to the business partnership to find out how do they see Concord and how do they see additional revenue sources? Do they see those opportunities to help us look at next steps? Rather than just saying we have to raise revenue, who's in charge of
Yeah,
trying?
no,
to
we do,
look
we
at
do.
that?
The Economic Vitality Committee.
Well, the town hired a
Staff.
director, right? The town hired a director,
Correct.
economic development director. So,
Yes.
so presumably that person, along with Carrie and the select board, are responsible ultimately.
Yeah.
This is sobering,
It is.
frankly.
That's why I think setting a target is good, right? It's not just,
Revenue growth target.
yes,
Yeah.
let's set some
Okay.
targets to say, this is what you got to get to help
Yeah,
us.
no, it's
I
good.
think that's
Yeah.
a great idea. And to say that we need to achieve this goal in order to maintain level services.
Right.
So is that goal constant? Is it 2 million this year? Are we looking at, are we
I
going
don't
to have
know.
a
That's what
graphic,
we
a
have- I
color
don't know.
graphic?
Bob,
that
can you pull out the
shows-
spreadsheet?
All you
Well,
have to do
we'll
is-
model it. Bob's got a good model.
You can see, we know where direction is.
Well, I think identifying a new growth target would be great. Okay, let's move on. Are we, any more comments or questions? I think that was, it's been pretty eye-opening working on this.
So I got two takeaways I made on the slides. One is to add in a specific call out for revenue, and then we'll have Bob estimate how much additional revenue would be necessary to avoid an override, and we'll work that in. Is that the consensus?
Sounds good.
Sounds
Right.
good.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
I want
that's
to thank
improvement.
I want to thank Lois and others who've been working on it. It's a big piece of work. So thank
is.
everybody
this is-
for moving this thing along. I know it's
This
not
has
done.
truly been a joint effort. It's really been a joint effort. Bob and Gail have been very helpful. Parashar has been tireless. You've been great, Chris. Peggy's been making herself available. Before we leave the discussion of the report, in terms of the procedure, it's in good shape. We've got whole sections of it pretty much together. There's a couple of holes. And the two major areas of holes right now are areas where will not surprise you. One of them is we do need a detailed discussion of the CPC situation, particularly the specific recommended projects. I know Dee's working on that with Ray, so I'm not worried about it, but that needs to be forthcoming very soon. And
Tomorrow.
that's very soon. And CPS is always hard to get your arms around the discussion of the CPS budget, the factual discussion, talking about what it is that the budget says, not necessarily getting into detail about the question about the budget exceeding guidelines is addressed in the front matter of the report, but there has to be a discussion of the budget itself. And this year, we don't have a tool that we had in past years, which was the school budget book was available. So the numbers were all in one place. This year, it's more complicated because the school has not done its budget book, or certainly hasn't posted its budget book. So we don't have easy access to the numbers. And this one's on Eric and Kathy's plate. Hi, Eric. The suggestion that we came up with to be helpful might be if we can get the narrative in shape, but need clarity on the numbers, let's ask the schools. Let's go to either working through Gail or directly with Bob Conroy at the schools. Let's see if we can get some direct, let them check their numbers and tell us if the numbers we have in that section are accurate. With those two sections, except for those two sections, we're arranging, we're editing and we're checking numbers, but I think we're pretty close. We as a committee are going to lose ownership of this document in a couple of days. It's going to move to the town, and we will still be able to comment and review drafts for another few days beyond that. But the actual document will reside with the town. And it's a real hard deadline. I mean, this has to be ready basically a week from Monday. So that's where we are.
Thank you, Lois. Thanks for your project management effort on the whole thing. Okay, let's move to 6 characteristics in housing costs. Lindsay. And thank you for this.
Oh, sure.
Very thoughtful.
So the reason I put together these few slides is a couple of weeks ago, and over the course of the public hearings, a few different comments were made by the public or by the select board that people were moving out of town because the tax burden was getting too onerous. So I decided to go and take a look at census data and see if if I could discern any trends or anything that could back that statement a little bit better. And so what I'm going to show here is these are just characteristics of households in our town and their finances. And my personal feelings are that economic diversity is important, and that I think it's important to the town that we maintain economic diversity, and that if that changes, the character of our town will change. And so I care about affordability. And so I know that our purview is taxes, and that's one piece of affordability. And these other things like revenue and economic development and affordable housing are all other pieces of this picture that I think will matter to making the town affordable. But, from the tax standpoint, I think knowing some of this data will help us as we think about guidelines for the coming years. And Parashar had the suggestion that, we should pull, some census data each year to make sure we kind of keep track of these trends over time. All right, so what we're looking at here is the number of households in Concord by household income. If these numbers don't foot exactly with other census data you've seen, they might be off by 100 or so. That's because these numbers don't include any households that have negative income or no cash rent. That's like a few households here and there, but this is generally, 99% of the households in Concord. The brown bar, those are households with less than 75,000 in household income, and then the purple bar is over 75,000 or more. And so the first, the takeaway for me from this slide is, progressively over time since 2011, and this is every 2 years worth of data, we've progressively becoming, a higher income town over time. And the number of households has also declined over the last few years. So I think that's like lower income and or higher income town and fewer households is kind of the first takeaway from this slide. And then I'll just move on to the next one here. So there's a lot going on this slide. So I'll just take a few minutes to give some footing. So what we're looking at in this slide, again, it's the 01742 zip code. So everything in Concord. And I tried to dig in a little bit on those households that have income of less than 75,000, and what kind of burden do they have as they're thinking about their household finances. So on the left-hand bars, I'll just go left to right on this slide, is the share of household income that goes to housing costs by household income level. So so on the left bar, the one that has more blue, those are households with 75,000 or more. And the right-hand bar with more pink those are households that have less than 75,000 in household income. And what this states is in that pink bar says that 30% or more of your household income, your monthly household income is going towards housing costs. Now, housing costs includes everything, from rent and mortgage. It also includes your home loans, any like condo fees you might have, and your taxes and your insurance, utilities, everything. So for 74% of households with less than 75,000 in household income are spending 30% or more of their monthly income on housing costs. And that number is only 15% of households are spending 30% or more if they're making more than 75,000. I use this 75,000 cutoff because that's really the cutoff for the census. Anything above that, they don't break it out in other increments. So that's why we're anchoring towards this. So, the bottom line is that those who are making less are spending a lot more just to stay in their homes and just to keep the lights on and stay living there. And then the middle bars kind of go into that 74% a little bit more. And, is it renter occupied, owner occupied with mortgage, or owner occupied without a mortgage that is seeing this burden? And it's really across the board. It's renters, but it's also owners with a mortgage. And it's also owners that don't have a mortgage. So, and what we're doing here with the pink bar is is our zip code, and the yellow bar is the United States overall. So you can just see how we compare to the average. And what's most striking to me is owner occupied without a mortgage, which I think of people who've lived in the town for 30 years or more, right? They're 66% of those households are still spending 30% or more on housing so of their household income. So that was striking to me. And by comparison, that number is 22% for the rest of the United States. And then I said, well, like, who are, what are other characteristics of this group of households that are making less than 75,000? And one other breakout you can find on the census website are age groups. So the final bar on the right is the households with income less than 75,000 by age group. And 70%, not surprisingly, 70% of those households are 65 and older. So where the householder is 65 and older. So it's, so I guess the three big points from these two slides, and then the following slides just show kind of the trends over time, but we're progressively becoming higher income. Those with lower income are spending a lot more on their housing costs than those with higher income, not surprisingly. And those with the lower income are older in general. So it was just enlightening to me. And if we look at the kind of the trends over time, that pink bar that we care about, and this top of the chart is those households less than 75. That pink bar where 30% or more of your income is going towards housing, that's grown over time. So from 70% to 74% of those households now are spending 30% or more on
And their number is declining.
Yes,
and their number is declining. And
They're leaving,
Yes.
right? That's
so that's where
what it
some of
looks
that,
like, right?
yeah, that's pretty prominent on this slide. Yeah.
Christine, either they're leaving or their income is
Passing
going
away.
over
Right.
75,000, one or
This
the
is
other.
not, a lot of reasons here.
Right, there
There's
could be
like
other
a lot of
reasons, right.
things happening here, but
Right.
this is just the day, and we can interpret it as we want. And
People to move.
right. And then, progressively over time, those households with less than 75,000 are older households progressively over time as well. So,
That demographic is the fastest growing demographic in the country. So while
Right.
our number is decreasing, that pool is increasing.
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Right. So I'm not like drawing any conclusions from this. It's more to help us understand some of the comments we've heard in hearings.
That
It's,
is fascinating data, Lindsay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Really, really interesting and sobering.
Sobering, yes.
Thank you, Lindsay. Any questions for Lindsay? Yes, Brian. For Gail, yes.
Someone had mentioned to me that there are, I should probably know this, but I just don't, that there are some subsidy programs
Mhm.
for seniors. And my question isn't sort of in the spirit of, well, we have these subsidies programs for folks. It's more about what are we capable and actively doing for fellow neighbors that run into these situations, you know. Is this it?
Yep, there you go.
That is it.
There are, I will say there are many.
Boom, boom.
So Brian, from my perspective, they're relatively meager.
They
Right?
kick in way,
Now-
they
now,
kick
having
in way
said
lower.
that, I think the select board and others are looking to see what we can do
Mhm.
to try to make them more generous. I don't know, there are constraints around what the state will allow, what the state constitution allows, et cetera, but folks are looking into it,
Okay.
right?
One thing that we are.
Which is good.
Do have some room with is CMLP, where we offer a senior discount that we can do on our own without the state, and that's pretty locked in. But a lot of these programs tend to turn out to be fairly meager, even at the $75,000 level for Concord residents. We do have a tax relief committee that just don't hear from the select board could talk to, that is working specifically on that issue.
And Lindsay,
And a fund, the Hugh Cargill Fund, we have some funds that'll give money to less wealthy residents.
Are there any tools that the Board of Assessors can expand or construct?
No, like to change the tax rate for,
Or if people can't afford their taxes, they, you know,
Yeah, they're in that list. There's.
They're on the
Take a
list.
look at the list.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll see them.
yeah, but they have to be approved by the state.
They have
and-
to be applied and there's
Yeah.
rules and so forth, but
But the assessor department does run most of these programs in the town. So once you get your income or whatever, your situation approved by the assessing department, then you're automatically eligible for most of these things, including the waiver on CPC money.
there was a meeting a while ago, because I also observe, not all the time, but I observed the Board of Assessors. They were talking about raising, I guess people can apply to have some relief as long as their savings are below $250,000. And they were thinking of raising that to 300. So I was just, and it just made me wonder, well, what if somebody really can't pay their taxes? Can they get a lien on their property? And when the property does eventually sell at some point, then the lien is paid off.
it's on the
That's the
list.
first.
Deferral.
It's also on.
On the list, yeah. Read the list.
So Lindsay, I want to reiterate what Lindsay, I'm sorry.
Right?
And I did a little homework on that and I was amazed, really frustrated, flabbergasted to learn that there's only 36 people, 36 households in town that get the exemption and 2 households in town that get the deferral. And the assessors said that, or the treasurer, actually, I guess, the tax collector said that they've tried to educate the Council on Aging, or educate people through the Council on Aging and so on. And yeah, the numbers are small. There's some complications. I mean, if you have a mortgage or on your house and there's a lender, if it's a local bank, they might let you get a lien from the town, but if it's not, they, would probably not want to take a second place, so they would refuse to allow you to apply for that. There's some real shortcomings in both of those plans. I think the ideas are good, but the numbers and the technicalities work against broad adoption or broad benefit from those 2 programs. Thanks.
So Lindsay, thank you for that analysis, because as long as I've been on the finance committee, we talk about that, we think this is happening and we talk about the impact, but the numbers make this come to life. And I really do think we ought to talk about this as we set the guidelines each year and also put it in the report, because again, this goes back to, we'd like to hope that Concord remains diverse, open to all types of folks, et cetera. But numbers are telling a different story. And so either, personally speaking, we either put up or shut up at the end of the day. If we're going to make this unaffordable, strike that. We're going to make this a town with a different set of characteristics, so be it, but let's then stop kidding ourselves.
Just so everybody knows, there's also been discussion at the select board. I'm not sure what the status of it is at this point, of raising the residential exemption. So that's another way to move more of the tax burden onto more highly assessed properties. So that's another thought that they're, reviewing. I guess that's, I've heard that.
And
So
that would need state approval.
I think so. Yeah, it's a bigger question as to whether we could do it or not, but yeah.
Okay, Lindsay, thank you. Okay, improvement ideas for the finance committee. That is Parashar.
Actually, if I was going to be Chris, you want me to
Yeah,
throw the
that's
slide
fine.
up
Can you
here?
put the slides up? That'd be great.
Let's just start talking. I'll pull them up here.
Yeah. So a little while back, and this was sort of a kind of a issue that came up last year as well, right? So we've in discussing how do we attract and retain talent on FinCom, and also how do we get leadership right in the committee. So one of the things that has consistently come up as we approach people for leadership roles, or even just to come on the committee, is capacity and their time to do the work. And this, compared to some other committees in town, has a lot of work. We have a lot of meetings. We have to go see our liaison. We have a report to produce, right? There's real work on this committee. So anyway, I was thinking about, well, what is it that we have a large committee. We have 15 slots. So is there a way to rethink the work and rethink the work distribution to make it more attractive to folks, right? To do A, to come on, and B, to move into leadership positions, to actually say, yes, I want to be chair, or I want to be vice chair, I want to be guidelines chair, all those opportunities that we have. So that was sort of the genesis of it. So I went off and thought about it. I met with Parashar and Lois and Peggy. They met with Gail and Carrie. I met with Carmen, and with that crowd, we sort of, came up with a bunch of ideas, which we thought be good to just start talking about. So these are ideas. This is, things we can do or not do, but it's a way to start thinking about it. Does that make sense? Any questions on that? Okay. All right. So let's go through it. Well, some of this is, you can see, we just talked about the first page, so I'll keep going there. On the second page, these are the deliverables, right? So I said, there's real work here, and you can see them there. You're familiar with them if you've been on the committee for a while. You're part of this. So we do have real deliverables. And on the next page, what's the work, right? You can see this is just a grounding. You guys all know this. It's how many meetings we have, public meetings, private meetings, and we have all kinds of, if you're the guideline chair, Parashar's meeting with budget folks behind the scene. There's a lot of work that goes into producing some of this, and including review of about 30 warrant articles a year. Some of this work we did this evening, keeping our minutes and agendas up, making sure we're working with other committees to find out what potential financial articles they may be thinking about putting on the warrant, so that we have prep and we have the committee updated on what's going on, right? So it's trying to keep your hands on a lot of moving parts within the town. Anyway, and then we have the capital plan, right? So we added that, was it last year? We started doing capital plan. As we talked about this evening, we could have some more ideas for capital plan. So the work keeps expanding, but there's plenty of work. Resources and structure, it's us. So we have a 15-person volunteer committee. We can serve up to 2 3-year terms, and we're appointed by the town moderator. Usually the chair works in consultation with the moderator on trying to attract and retain committee members. So there's usually a dialogue that's going on there. We can do more, and that's going to be one of the recommendations there. The membership is meant to be representative of a diverse group of folks around town, from different parts of town, different age groups, folks with kids, folks without kids. We want to have a reflection of the community at this table. And so that's part of the mix of skills. The training has been primarily on the job. And this one is one that I think impedes us a bit, right? So when you're here in your first year, you're like, what the hell's going on, right? Most of the meetings. And it takes a while to figure out what, how do we do this? I think we can do a better job at that. I think we can do more work up front to allow ourselves to hit the ground running faster as committee members. We have this structure for officers. We have a chair, we have the vice chair / guidelines chair, we have a clerk, and we have a guidelines clerk. So we've identified 4. It was interesting because Carmen gave me some historical documents, and actually what we're supposed to have, according to I found out some things. We're supposed to we had a chair, we can have a clerk and a secretary and a treasurer. So you can have a chair, a vice chair, a secretary, and a treasurer. That's what it
Treasurer for
says.
happy hour?
No. Well, that's exactly right. It's interesting because we had a very different role a long time ago. This was an update from of the bylaw in 1969. So a long time ago, there weren't the same folks in the town that there are today. So our role was we had primary approval over contracts. So we had a different role earlier on before the town government sort of grew on its own to have a CFO and so forth.
In those days, where you could smoke and drink inside the town hall. Probably. Anyway, so technically we can have 4. We've evolved a little differently, but that's just, although it's pretty close. We don't really have a treasurer anymore. And then we ask individual members to have liaison roles or observer roles with other town committees and boards. Our chief liaison or our chief support is Gail, is the CFO. And that office really supplies us most of the support with respect to writing our report, getting information that we need from the town and so forth. They're our main info feed. And they also help a great deal with the annual report, as Lois mentioned. Previously, the town supplied us a minute taker. We don't have that anymore. So at the moment, we're doing it ourselves. So that's sort of where we are. Okay. This then, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, this is very helpful though, if you want to look at it, right? We actually tried to lay out if those are the roles that we have, chair, vice chair, clerk, and so forth, what are they supposed to be doing? And so again, I'm not going to take you through this. It should be familiar to you. But we sort of laid it out because it was helpful for us to say who's doing the work as we looked at that. Okay, so current scope of responsibilities is there. So let's go to page 9, Parashar. So what do we do? So if we think I guess my first question is do people agree that we can distribute work differently, think about training differently, and perhaps change the time load a little bit to help attract and retain members? I'm just going to put that out there and see if people think that's actually a problem. Okay, so people agree with my problem statement. That's what I'm trying to
Don doesn't.
Seeing how much work this is, I think I'm resigning.
Come on, I did this work.
You're not allowed to resign. I'm sorry. Not accepted.
The only way I could do any recruiting was promise not much.
Well, I think that's been happening for a long time. I think there's
We'll make Don the treasurer.
Hey, Chris, was the purpose of this presentation to help us to attract people or scare them away?
No. Well, we're going to get to the fun part. We're going to get to the fun part. This is okay. So what could we do? So here I have some ideas. These come from everybody, right? But these were the ideas that we came up with. So we could add some additional roles, right? So we could add some more leadership roles to the committee. There's a question as to whether we have to change our bylaw to do that or not, or could we do it via subcommittees? But so we can figure out how one actually accomplishes it. But the goal was to add backup to the people who are in the leadership roles so they can split meeting assignments, split work, and so forth. And it was also give us
split work. These are opportunities to participate.
Oh, yes, opportunities to participate. That's right. That's right.
So
Parashar is
work
the
it out.
marketing manager of this exercise. So you're right. He likes me to say opportunities. Exactly. So the other part of it, right, is to also create more training for succession, right? So the more responsibility or opportunity that you have on the committee, the more able you are to sort of see the broader picture and contribute in a leadership role, right? Because unless you sort of see what all the pots that are going on in the town, it's hard to have that ability to sort of join, feel comfortable about being in a leadership role. It takes a while. So this is another way to do that. Town and committee liaison. So I've been thinking about this one because, even this year, once we get into the drumbeat of work, it even becomes hard to have observer reports. You've seen, you haven't had a lot of time to even do observer reports. So, and it takes time to do these meetings. Meetings are running, our meetings even run 3-4 hours sometimes. Other meetings run that long as well. No, this is where it's true. So how do we figure out ways to do that? So could we work with the other board chairs in town that we are observing? So make sure we're observing the right ones. Can we shorten that list? And maybe we can. And 2, working with the chair of those meetings to say, look, how often do we need to communicate? I need to be on your distribution list for all your agendas and all your materials. And based on that, and whatever you tell me, Mr. Chair, Mrs. Chair, I'll know what to bring into FinCom. And that may mean I don't observe all your meetings for 3 hours. I may tune in for the hour where I know there's a critical item. So it would help us, I think. Now, maybe we're already doing that. I don't know, but. The mic, yeah, sorry.
That's a really important part. The representative from the FinCom has to have a relationship with the chair of
Right.
the other committee. It's really important to be able to dialogue, to meet for coffee, do whatever, to get a really better understanding of what that work is that they're doing,
Yep.
if they're not familiar with it.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, so thinking about how we're more strategic, I guess, in using our time as opposed to just tuning into a video to really figure out what's going on in that committee. What do I need to know about? What do I need to bring it back to FinCom and when, right? So that have that be the role rather than just sitting in through meetings. Other resources. So talking to Gail about support for meeting management, guidelines preparation, annual report. So making sure that we're using the town support as best we can, right? What should we be doing? So for instance, during this annual report, if you remember, we used to do our own 5-year projection of the taxes. It's a requirement in our report. And for at least the past couple of years, we've been doing it. We actually had remember Dean was working on it. Right? So we this year said, that shouldn't be us, right? And so we asked Bob and Gail to take that on, and they did. So again, thinking about, are we making the best use of town resources so that we can take some effort off of what we're doing. And then this was Parashah's idea, which was a good one, is potentially seeing if we could get a public policy grad student in from one of the local grad programs, which we have many that focus on government, to do our minutes, be a learning experience for them.
Not for you personally, for the committee.
Right. So I think you spoke to Carrie about that and she thought that was a great idea.
Yeah.
So that would be something, again, that would take some of the workload and distribute it a little bit
Chris, can I
better.
ask you one
Please,
question?
yeah,
on the
yeah,
top?
please.
Has vice chair always been guidelines chair as well?
Since I've been here,
Me
it's the
too,
same.
But has it like?
I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Couldn't have been because the guidelines were only established in 2019 or 20.
Oh, no. Oh,
No.
It's before that.
Oh, I'm sorry, that's the SGR.
SGR, yeah. Yeah, so I don't know, Greg.
Gotcha.
I don't know. Does anybody else know? Anybody? I don't know, Carmen, if there was, if we always had a guidelines chair and vice chair together. I don't
Were they
know.
the same people?
As long as I remember, but
Yeah.
I only go back so far.
Yeah.
You go back further. I think
So-
since 2000.
Okay, so a while.
I mean, we can
20
separate if
years.
you want to. There's
We-
nothing
we
that says
can,
we
we
have to.
Oh, we could, yeah.
It's a nice combination because the guideline chair is the number cruncher. And that leaves the chair time to worry about the agendas and.
Can't hear.
Oh, so sorry. I think that the guidelines chair is the real number cruncher. And that leaves the chair with, in my view, a little different duty for setting agendas and, coordinating with the board of selectmen and that sort of thing.
Yeah, you need at least two, you need those two roles for sure. The question is whether if we add a few more backup to sort of say with the, does that help people say, okay, I'll do this?
That's an excellent idea. The
Okay.
whole program that you're presenting is really good.
Okay, good. We'll see if people like it. Okay, if we can go to page 10, Parashar. So the other thing is really talking about, this is also thinking about how we as a committee, what we're doing. So when I was chair, one of the things we started talking about was what are our long-term goals as a committee, right? What do we want to work on? So, tonight we just talked about one, right? Revenue enhancement, right? Is that something we want to work on? If you remember a couple of years ago, we worked on, or maybe just this year, we worked on debt. Even before that, you worked on debt 2 years ago, you worked on debt. Then we worked on the capital plan. So we've done that. We just haven't been very explicit about it, right? So I put a couple things up at the beginning of the year as chair. I think we picked one. We said, all right, we can't chew them all, but we can probably absorb one. And then, there are other ones on there like sustainability, right? There are a lot of topics in town that will at some point drive cost or revenue, right? And or revenue into the equation. Do we want to learn about those? How do we get smarter about those? What committees might we talk to, et cetera? So do we want to have our own goals as a committee and how would we set them? I think we do. So I would suggest we continue to do that. And this was a great idea, sort of right after town meeting, having our first meeting where we sit down and we don't do anything other than talk about what are our goals, where are we, and how did the past year go, right? What did we like? What didn't we like? What would we like to change? So, whatever, because we're right there. It's all right in our heads, right? It would make sense to do something like that.
And by the way, that's something that at least I've publicly gotten on the high horse of encouraging the schools to do that in one document. And I've talked to Carrie and Carrie agrees, and she's going to develop a process for the town to do the same thing because the town doesn't have a strategic plan.
Yeah.
And so I think we should all look at ourselves, figure out what we want to do, and then look in the mirror the year after and see how do we do in one place. We can have a scorecard and we can not say ourselves as to what we've done.
Right. So it could be many things, right? It could be relationship building. It could be education, whatever it is, right? Things that we want to do as a committee. Okay. Training. So I think we can do a much better job on training. This is complex. And we pretty much leave it to, come to meetings and learn, right? Which is not the best way. It's not a fast way, certainly, to learn. So we did have, and so there was, prior to COVID, Carrie ran a 2-hour session in August. That was very good, but it was very targeted to what I would call sort of the kind of the government structure to being on a finance committee. It's very good kind of grounding you in what is a finance committee, what are the statutes, what do you do? And then we also talked about budgets and so forth, but there's a lot more to it than that. So that's kind of I call it the more generic, not the Concord view, but the generic view of finance committees and what do you do on the finance committee? What do you do with reserves? It sort of teaches you where the boundaries of our role are. It's very good. But I think we could use more. So what is it we want to, at a minimum, I think we need a resource book. So one of the things that happens to new members, it happened to me, no one knows where to go. You don't know how to figure out the town calendar. You don't know how to figure out how to get your name on the subscription to an agenda if you're an observer, right? Nobody knows how to do that probably for a year. Nobody knows how to talk to Chris Carmody. Where do I get stuff, right? How do I find the budget books on the website, right? There's so much data that we can use both on this town website and also on the municipal groups. There are municipal groups. There's actually an association of town finance committees. Anybody been to some of their sessions? I have, right? So Carrie, again, pre-COVID, when we would sign us up they have seminars, right? Whereas we can go to them, right? So there's training that's available to us as committee members that I think we don't avail of ourselves. I get something off of DLS, same thing that town treasurers get. It tells me when the cherry sheets are out. It tells me everything that a town treasurer is getting. I can see from the state. You can see the data, so Lindsay took it on herself to look at census data that's available to us. There's housing information that's available. There's school budget information that's out there that's available, but you need to know how to get it, right? How to access it, how to use it. So I think we could also create a resource tool and training for members so that they kind of hit the ground running and say, I know where to go to find this. I know who to call, right? And maybe we need mentors, right? So when new members come on, they're given a name that says, every question you have on FinCom, you go to this person who's been on for 3 or 4 years so they can help you know how to navigate. I just think it would make us be better. So I think that would be a good thing. And I would do some of this in the summer. So when we have our kind of, lower periods, right? In the summer, we would try and, hammer this in to get some more training going for the committee. And succession planning. Sorry. So, working with the moderator on it's, so we pretty much, I shouldn't say pretty much, but Carmen does most of the lift with respect to finding new members. We need to help. We need to help find people to come on the committee. So if there are people who we know in the community who we think would be good members, we need to talk about how much fun we have. How engaging and interesting this work is, because it certainly is. At times it's emotional, right? So that work, if you like it and you want others to join us, then we need to help be part of the advertising.
Even
for
if you
that.
don't like it.
Yeah. Okay. They all love it. They all love it. Anyway, so I think that we can do a better job of coming out with our own roster and making our own phone calls out to individuals to say, hey, so that we have a kind of a list of people who could be coming up that we can cycle through to help the moderator find folks for the committee, because we need to always have new folks. Every year we're turning over. I think this year
Just Brian.
we could have, but we could have, I
You're
think.
finishing your second term.
Yeah, he's all done.
You're done.
Yeah, he says that with a smile.
That body language.
I know.
And how many do you have on the slate to fill his spot?
I think there was 4 or 5, right? Yeah.
You can't be filled.
Not so much.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's something else I think we can work on. And then when folks come, I think would be good for us, again, either the chair or through the mentorship program, to find out, what are you interested in, right? So once, once people get a sense of what's going on in the committee, how do we find out what turns you on, right? What do you want to talk about or learn about in the town, and try to align assignments so that people can get more, can get good enjoyment and it aligns with what they're trying to do. So we've tried to do that with you and Ray on the affordable housing. But it's your thing, right? It's good. So we're trying to make sure we get people, give them what they're looking for. And I mentioned the training.
I just want to interject
Yeah.
something. We have a couple of new people this year. I'd love to hear also when you finish.
Yeah.
I'd love to hear their comments, if they want to make any comments about maybe ideas they might have that you haven't covered, or what scares them the most, or whatever.
Right. Well, that's good. Let's go to that. I like that, Dave.
Yeah, well, John's not here tonight.
Suresh
He's a
is.
risk.
You want to be that first? Yeah,
Yeah,
that's good.
but yeah. What do people
I think we just have to
Lindsay?
call on them if,
Yeah,
there you
Lindsay,
go.
what do
Hey,
you
Parashar, would you,
Those ideas, any of those make sense?
hey, Parashar, would you stop sharing your screen so we can see the video a little bigger? Thanks.
Well, I think these are good. I like the 2 ideas I like the most are having some kind of onboarding or training that kind of gets where to find things, getting on the right email lists, all those kinds of things I think would be helpful. A little bit more understanding of kind of the rules of how things work and proposing things, and the importance of getting on the agenda to be able to talk about things, all those little things that folks might not be aware of. So I like the onboarding. I also like the idea of kind of spreading out the workload because I can see that some members are doing quite a bit. So that probably would help to, attract people. And I don't know if you've ever thought of even expanding the size of the committee to spread out the workload even more, but it's already pretty big. I understand. So I like the spreading out the work. I think, I just talked to a candidate who was thinking about joining the committee, who the biggest hesitation is the time commitment. So, 5-hour meetings don't help, when you have, if we want diversity of committee and, little kids at home and things like that. So yeah, those, I think improving the efficiency of how we operate would also be, would be something that would help.
Good.
Again, it's not spreading,
Yeah, I
it's
know
not
that
spreading the
2
work.
hours of that was, I was spreading the work.
It's
will
not
have-
spreading the work. It's opportunities, opportunities.
Yeah,
What to say.
right.
Yeah, I'm not a sales.
Yeah, he's not, we're not, yeah. Okay, Don, what do you think? I'm interested.
Oh, boy. Okay, well, first I want to say how much I enjoy this because of the high level of discourse on this committee. It has enriched my life to be involved here. And I can say that that is when I'm observing others, I don't get the same feeling other town committees. So I want to say thank you to all of you for that. And for also being good listeners to one another. I sincerely don't have a formed opinion on our until I've heard from the rest of you. I really like the idea that after town meeting, we sit down and set some goals, and then we look at how we can structure ourselves for that. I think our remit of advising on impact on items that impact taxation is maybe a little too narrow, that there might be within this group people and skill sets and also contacts that could be leveraged in other ways as well. For example, within affordable housing finance, et cetera, things that economic vitality. There are things that we could contribute to that we can put on that may
That'd be great.
further invigorate folks. And I'd like to suggest that that all past chairs become members of FinCom for life, because we don't want to lose all the valuable institutional knowledge.
Subject to be a chair.
That'll fill up pretty quickly, yeah. Suresh.
Okay, I want to second what Don said, get the past chairs to be the, part of the standing committee over here. So that would be great. No, it's been really a pleasure to be part of this here. And yes, mentoring could be a very helpful tool. I mean, Chris, I've been getting a lot of advice from her, talking to her, what can be done, what needs to be done, being a liaison with the building committee. And that's, when I signed up, I didn't think I expected to be a 3.5 hour meetings every week, but that's what it was. So hopefully it's going down now. So, but I think the biggest part of the town is to be part of this town, to be inclusive and making it, bringing in what Lindsay just, made a great presentation. Thanks, Lindsay. That really helps to promote as to what's happening in the past, what's happening. There might be some, I would say, abnormalities between 2019 and 2021, what we've gone through the last 2 years, but we'll see how that, pans out in the next 2 years, because that'll show us whether, unfortunately, we had mortalities or did we really lose people, because that jump is scary, let's put it this way. So that's, but I think we do need to bring more people in.
Still going on?
It's very important.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Suresh. Okay, I think those are the new folks that we have. Is that anybody else that's new that wants to say anything I missed? I don't think so. Ray. All right, Ray.
Yeah. I feel like a new person in some ways. I do. I think I've only been here about 12 years. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, I think training orientation, I really felt like, the financial sophistication that I didn't have was a real liability in my participation in the committee. I've learned a lot about the town. The important part of the town. Money's not everything, but money affects most everything. And there's some really talented people on this committee, and I do wish I had had more access to some of that. Probably a training program, mentoring program would be a great improvement, I think. And I also do wonder why the guidelines chair and the vice chair need to be the same role. What's the benefit of having those connected? I think disconnecting those would be a way to as Parashar would say, create more opportunity for involvement. Not to mention lighten the workload.
Right.
Thank you.
Good. Brian, please.
This is my last year, so it's been a real privilege to do this. And part of me getting started on this was to really get to know the town and feel like I was a part of the town. And so just being here, I think it's been a real high privilege. But what happened to me over the course of my time was I ended up going back to work, and the constraint on my ability to really kind of engage at times has just been, quite frankly, overwhelming at moments. And so my ability to perhaps take a leadership position in a much more formed fashion has just been challenging. And, I've had conversations with people about that. What I'd like to know, or what I'd like to suggest, if possible, to leadership is leaning into technology that allows the committee process to be a lot more accessible to us. I think COVID was kind of like a godsend for me because I could just zoom in. I could be on a call. If I'm in transit, I can just be connected somehow. And I think that there was I think others may have shared the same view. So leaning into that, minutes, for example, Lois, thank you. I guess I just want to say that, start with that. Thank you for all the support. But the point there is we have a video for why are we doing long form minutes? And
Brian,
maybe there's a policy around that.
there's a law around it.
Oh, okay.
There's a law around it. The official record of what we did is a written document. We can't avoid it. And Amarath shared with me some materials that I'll circulate to the whole committee that restates the obligations that have been set out by the government, by the state. You don't have to do transcripts. Not every statement made in a meeting has to be recounted. But the goal is that someone who wasn't at the meeting should be able to tell what was discussed and what was decided by reading the document, not by watching the video.
So thank you for that. And maybe on a going forward basis, just an overview on how to write minutes might be helpful.
That's a really good point.
So,
I
just wanna
yeah,
put that
okay.
That's a
on the
really
I
record.
hear you.
Yeah, if we're still writing them, if you don't have it. For that
Still
grad
writing
student.
them. A better solution is to find somebody.
Yeah, that would be good. That would be good.
Louis, do you want to circulate that?
Yeah, I will.
Okay.
Amrit.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So those are is there anything people don't like? Is there?
Ray's got his hand
Oh,
raised.
yeah, sure. Ray, you still got a question? Yeah.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Speaking of technology, I find that, well, I wear hearing aids and I'm a little hearing handicapped, and probably there are other people who might participate or be happy to participate who find the same thing. The hearing room is unmanageable for me. And even in this, the select board's meeting room, as long as people use the microphone, it's much easier for me to hear what people are saying than it is to be there in person. So, yeah, so this added to what Brian was saying about the ability to be anywhere in the country or probably in the world and participate is a plus. Just a comment.
Is there any other technology that you meant besides Zoom that you think we're not using?
I can give you one.
What's that?
So in some of the earlier meetings, I had requested that the transcript of these meetings be prepared, and that became really useful the one or two times that I did minutes in the past, because I just get the transcript and I read back through the transcript rather than watching a 5-hour public hearing. Zoom will allow you to do it. The transcript will be super helpful. You can even copy and paste large sections of it into the minutes if you so desire. We don't have to do that, but it'll definitely help writing the minutes. That's an example of what we could do.
Closed captioning also is probably similar.
What was
Closed
that?
captioning, closed
Same
captioning.
thing.
That's a good question.
Amberth, you've only written 2 minutes this year, so I think you're probably up for 3-4 of the first ones for next year.
I'm sorry, I'm having a hard time hearing what you're saying. Technology isn't working. Did you put that in the minutes, Parasha?
Touche.
His lips are moving, but he's not saying anything at all.
Did he mean that or was he kidding?
He's
That's
kidding, he's kidding.
Okay,
Okay, all right, so anything you don't like, anything you say, gee, that's a bad idea, because if you like this idea, then I'll come back with some consolidated, here's some, let's do this, right? This is where we can implement this. If that makes sense, I'll go off and do that.
So
Yeah.
we had a few more slides. Hopefully folks will go through those tables.
we have the
right? I don't
table
know
that
that we've got a
shows.
summary at the end, so.
And then I need volunteers,
Yeah.
right? So this is for real. So I'm going to need people to think about which of these roles you would like to be in, right? And if it isn't now, maybe it's in a year, whatever, but I'd like feedback from you on which of these you think you would like to be involved with, right? So now instead of being 4 roles at the top, there'd be more like 6 or 7, okay?
Chris just volunteered to be chair for next year by that statement. Carmen, you noted that.
I
She
did.
took control of the meeting and the committee. So we've got one
No.
slot filled.
Already did that.
Chris,
Deja
and
vu.
Chris and Parashar, really, thank you so much. And Lois.
And Lois.
Lois for doing this. The I think the clerk ends up with the lion's share of the work for the most extensive part of the year.
It would be nice if the change the procedure, change that, because no one's going to want to be clerk after me.
I know. Well,
We
I think
need
we
to
should
change it.
write up the report in the summer when it's quiet and then just fill in the numbers.
That'd be fine with me.
And right, no more, you only get 1 or 2 years on the back bench.
Peggy, one other suggestion I wanted to add.
Yeah.
I'm sorry. One other suggestion I wanted to add, and there might be a process in place that I'm just not aware of. One of the things as I came on the committee, I wanted to go back to previous years' file folders that kind of really kind of went into
Yeah,
something that kind of
right.
went into all the data
Yeah.
that we were tracking in some form or fashion. Lindsay's presentation should get filed for,
Right.
for this fiscal year.
Right,
Absolutely.
meeting
And
materials,
then
right?
we have sort of a
Right.
working file folder system that committee members can go back to and just.
That's an excellent
peruse
idea,
around.
like for guidelines. We should have all the final guideline
Yeah.
sheets, in there, right? Yeah.
Just to give people the ability to kind of freeform,
Yeah.
the
No,
process.
Some of
really
us
good.
have been collecting,
So
That makes it
Finance.
easier.
You should hold that thought
Yeah,
till.
here
but
you should
not
hold-
everybody. has.
Have
I have some
materials
of the
that-
files that I keep for that exact
so
reason.
Brian,
Sorry.
Yeah.
Very good
You
idea.
should be repeating, and I think you're doing this already,
Yeah.
which is to just repeat certain things and processes. that bring up.
Hey, you guys should wait for Lewis to send out the note about what needs to be in the minutes, because any.
I sent it
document-
out.
Yeah, oh, you already sent it out. Anything which is discussed.
Well, I sent it
in-
to Gail and Bob, so if one of them can just forward it on to the FinCom mailing list.
Okay, cool. Yeah, anything which is
So-
discussed in the meeting, any handout which is used as part of the discussion should be available to a person at a later day.
Yeah, we're supposed to do that, but it doesn't look like we have much on the website because we have a file, there's a button that you press for meeting materials, but it's not very current,
It's on
I
the
would say.
agenda.
We should just make it part of the
We
minute.
get- but There's tons of meeting
It's not the whole
materials that we
packet.
give. It should be the whole packet, right?
It's usually the agenda is what is up there.
And the-
nothing
No,
else.
but no, there's actually a button that says meeting materials. It should be more than the agenda. Yeah,
It should be the full packet.
it should be.
And it also should be copies of any presentations made at the meeting, because that's
Exactly.
always a problem when you're doing the minutes.
Right,
If you want to actually refer back to the presentation material, sometimes you have to dig through and look at the school committee site in order to find the presentation, because it wasn't packaged with the FinCom materials, even though it was presented at FinCom. And then you can't be sure the presentation was exactly what was made.
That's another job.
Yeah,
on
for the
your
intern.
list. Well, not necessarily for the intern, but somebody on the
Somebody,
committee,
yeah.
or possibly a
Staff.
different intern.
Or
So it
or
could be a
Gail.
Records
Gail's
management,
office can help with that.
yeah, a records management person.
Yeah, somebody,
Chris Carmody.
yeah, you can tell me
So
what,
one thing the school committee did, Alex and I talked a little bit about this. They've started a Google Drive where they have a bunch of folders. So any member of the school
that
committee
would
can
work.
go in
Yeah.
and that's their store of historical record. It doesn't have to be
Yeah,
complex.
that's a good idea.
Or complicated, right?
That's a
And
good
so
idea.
that's something that we ought to just think about carefully
That's a good idea.
of what should be there.
I do think that
As long as
having
there's-
it online at the, concordma.gov
Uh-huh.
site is really important. Because I try to find information on other committees
yeah.
and it's really difficult to find what I'm looking for.
Yep, it
sometimes.
is sometimes.
Can you,
Eric,
Gail, can you
it's-
add to that? So, I mean, I'm looking at it, it says download agenda. Can you also put up that, a,
The meeting packets are available through the finance committee website. So I believe tonight's packet should actually already be.
right, so your
There.
handout should be up there in the packet, right?
Lindsay's.
Yes,
Lindsay's
Lindsay's, it should
handout's
be in
tonight.
there. Yes, yes.
Nothing that you guys presented. would
No,
be up there.
No.
We'll
we can add it.
email
Can-
that.
Yeah, the question is,
then
can you
it
add
should be
that
on.
and then add that to the site?
Yeah,
So
but
the
it,
goal is I've been attempting as I'm gathering the information, I work very closely with the chair and vice chair to get the information for the packet and then put the packet. If there are other materials that get handed out, we can put it in the packet and repost the packet. So it's a matter of gathering the data.
All of that makes sense to me, but I think the nuance that I just want to point out here is the underlying data file is really, really helpful to us. So the packet I get, put it on public record, make sure people have access to it. But I'd like to be able to look at the spreadsheet.
Look at the Excel spreadsheets.
Okay.
Yes.
I wouldn't necessarily think that we would want open access to spreadsheets for data integrity reasons. So that was my only point.
Well, also because the spreadsheets are a constant, they're a living organism. And if someone pulls it out,
you have to have the version,
makes their whole presentation all based on one set of numbers, which is going to change the following week, then we're chasing
Well,
our
but there's
tail.
ways to do this so that
Yes.
what goes, the spreadsheet can go for that meetings.
Yeah.
Right? If it changes the following week, it changes. There's ways to do this.
Yeah.
And
Eric,
I had a somewhat related to this, Gail and I were in touch in the aftermath of last week's marathon meeting. Where we had all that correspondence coming in and Gail was on the hook to send us several updates to the packet in the spirit of making her job easier and speaking for myself, making it easier to follow along and prep for the meeting. What if we explored like a Google Drive or a Dropbox type tool? I was on a committee in another town before I moved to Concord, and that's what we did. And the expectation was set that members went into the folder the day before the meeting, and there was your materials. There were no emails exchanged or anything like that. It was very easy.
I'm not familiar with that, but what about security? Is there an issue associated with the?
no, you gotta pass the password.
That's one of the items that we were talking about is I need to look into to make sure there's no risk that who's depositing, sounds like a weird word, who's putting the files on there. You want to make sure you don't run risks of viruses, that you don't. So there is for discussions that I would want to have with IT folks internally, just to make sure from an integrity, from a security, it becomes a public record. So we need to make sure we're looking at it. It does make it easier for the users. So I've taken it after we discussed it briefly last week to look into the feasibility of it and to see if it's reproducible, because if you build it, they will come. And then how do we think about other committees? So I've taken that as an action item to work with folks.
That
to
would be great.
explore The possibilities.
You should talk to Alexa because the school committee does have Google.
And Alexa Google.
I know. Alexa, Alexa, we want a Google Doc site.
Just what our functionality and technology
right.
would allow if Google may, not everyone's a Google shop, so it is.
I think it's
something-
a great idea. And I'm going to wrap up this discussion because I know
Minutes.
I
Oh,
said
wait,
this
Bob
discussion.
had.
Bob.
You've had some excellent ideas. I especially like what we used to call hot wash after an emergency to, discuss what went right, what went wrong. So you do that after town meeting. I think especially with what you see this year, you should start to set up annual or more often meetings with the select board and the school committee at the same meeting. All three of you should meet. It should be a FinCom meeting This year, I suggest you do it before your guidelines process. Much better to do it before the heat of battle. I think both those committees need to be brought into what you know and what you see, but it's also a good thing to do on a regular basis. A lot of ideas get exchanged, a lot of information can pass back and forth because it's so hard for you to keep up with all the committees.
We used to
But
do-
if
we
the
used to
select
do
board
that.
tells you what their priorities are, that can help you,
Yeah.
sort of understand.
And I think building on that, so having the 5-year projections that you guys did, both on the revenue and the cost estimate side as a framework for that discussion at the beginning, I think would also be helpful. So one of the things I know we've talked about is meeting with Bob Conroy and doing a little bit of a lessons learned this year and see how we can improve that process for next year and kind of do that early. So we've got the proper data and proper framework for the budget conversations, both on the
So we
revenue and the
don't
cost.
wind
side.
up with two entities at guidelines and one way over. So,
Well, no, I mean, that may still happen, but
Yeah.
at least everybody has kind of an understanding.
okay. Good, because everybody did say they didn't want 3 or 4 hour meetings. Let's go to approving minutes. I think we just have March 1st.
I have some corrections.
Are they?
There,
uh,
I have about 5 very quick corrections.
Can you provide those to Lois? Are they the
Are
kind of
they
corrections that we
editorial or
should
they change the
discuss?
story?
It adds to the story. 2 of them.
Then we
add-
should hear them.
We should hear them.
We should hear them.
All right.
Are we going to like the story?
It's gonna get better.
No,
It's gonna get
the story
clearer.
Has been written on page 3.
Great, okay.
Under finance committee questions, the 3rd bullet. Ms. Ordner asked if the town could give an assessment of infrastructure improvements that are required. And there should be inserted after required per year over the next 5 years. Because the response was 10 million per year, but it was, excuse me, it goes after that. I'm sorry. Ms. LaFleur said that the town could spend approximately $10 million per year on public works. And my specific question to her was per year over the next 5 years. So it would be not just 10 million for the year, but it would be 50 million over the 5 years. Okay, that was the first one. And then the second one follows that with Mr. Dahlberg's question, which was asked if the town gets a trade in on required vehicles. Ms. LaFleur said that trade-in values are factored in, but have been low in the recent past. That was period, but it should include due to the age of the equipment, because she said the equipment was 20 years old.
Okay.
2 typos I can let Brian know since he has the minutes right there. But then I had a couple questions on page 4. Finance committee question, Mr. Patel asked Ms. Dowd to provide some additional information so that we have a fuller understanding of how funds are paid out and to whom. Now, I'm not sure if that request has been met, but I know in the past we used to identify those in our minutes so that on the minutes that highlighted that. So that was one.
I'm surprised I actually had this question.
What?
In all seriousness, I'm not sure it was even me.
Oh,
It was about who was getting paid out of OPEB, something like that.
Oh, no.
the
You
other,
decided to,
I'm not that detail oriented.
okay. I don't know, that's what it
To
sounded
be
like.
pretty clear. I know, I'm gonna have to
Yeah.
go back and check the
Yeah,
video.
yeah,
because I'm
check the
surprised.
video, right.
there you go.
Somebody took over my body.
The other one is on page 7. Finance committee question, middle of the page. Ms. Reynolds asked if the town continues to lose money on these meters. Ms. Dowd will circle back to get her back to her with the data.
And I don't know if you did or not. I can't remember, but we talked about it. I thought at another hearing, I think.
We did.
Yeah, we did. And yeah, I think the answer was we do. Yeah,
Yeah,
so that
but-
one's closed. I
That's
know the answer to
closed?
that. Yeah.
You know the answer to that. Do you want to share that answer?
The answer is yes. I think they lose money on it.
Yeah,
And the answer, and that will be reflected in a subsequent set of minutes.
Yeah, I
because
know,
it
I knew
wasn't
it was
answered
answered
at this
somewhere.
meeting.
Yeah,
It
okay.
wasn't answered at this meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And I'll give you
So
rule correction.
Dee, are
Alright.
you giving those changes to,
I'm
to
going to
Brian?
give the, yes, I'm going to give those
Okay, great.
corrections to Brian. And I,
So-
the other thing was, these minutes came in really handy when our hearing on the 15th came up, because we had those by then. And I could go back and refresh and find out, some of the questions I asked at that meeting. I could then dig deeper.
All right.
Well, we are close, thanks to everybody's efforts. We are pretty close to being caught up on the minutes. We're not very far behind. So hopefully that will continue to be an advantage we'll have.
All right.
So can we have a motion to approve the March
make
1st
a motion
minutes
to
as
approve the
amended?
March 1st minutes as amended.
Second,
Hang on. There's two sets of minutes. There's
Two
March
sets.
1st public hearing meeting minutes and finance committee meeting. So please clarify your motion.
Clarify your motion.
Sorry,
Clarify your motion.
for the minutes we just reviewed, which is the minutes, the public
Which were
hearing.
both. So why don't we move to
Public
accept both?
hearing. Public hearing.
Public hearing and meeting.
Public hearing and FinCom meeting.
Oh, we had no other comments on the other one? Okay, then both.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposed? Thank you.
One
We
abstain.
have to do a roll call.
Roll call.
Yeah.
Roll call, roll call. Okay, let me
Fine.
get my roll
We need to
call.
write that down. When we have to do roll calls.
Brett.
I was off.
Anytime we're doing a hybrid meeting, we're supposed to do a roll call.
I know. I
Okay.
have the Robert's rules in my head.
Your education.
I don't know if Robert's rule says about Zoom.
It's not Robert's rules, it's
Yeah.
Mass General Law. It's the special dispensation on remote meetings.
Okay, all right.
Hold on, hold on.
Cameron, yeah.
Hold on.
Kathy is absent. Eric,
Yes.
I think Kathy's here.
No, she's not.
No.
She's out.
John is absent. Greg,
Abstain.
Amherst,
Yes.
Dawn,
Yeah.
Lindsay,
Yes.
Dee,
yes,
Parashar,
Yes.
Christine,
Yes.
Brian,
Yes.
Lois.
Yes.
So we have one abstention, and that is Greg, because you weren't there,
Correct.
and two absent. That's Kathy and John. Okay. Excellent.
All right.
Any correspondence?
So everything that I have received up until the date I published the packet has been included. And I checked, there's nothing else that's come in the email since then, but anything that would come in, I would put in the next packet.
Okay, good. And I have just from a protocol standpoint, asked Gail and Bob to be the distributor so that if you're like me and you want to sort your email by who sent it, it would come from them, not also from me or from Parashar or Christine to the whole committee. Okay, any public comments? Doubt there'll be any in here because there aren't any members.
Here.
oh.
We have two online, okay. Carlin,
Thank you. Carlin Reed, 83 Wits End. You folks have scared me silly about the override potential. Congratulations. I will want some more information about that. I appreciate that. Very good discussion. I do have one question, and it was something that Christine had raised, and it regards raising the residential exemption. Christine, I think you made some reference that it was difficult to do, that there was some illegality issues that we needed to, that it was difficult. Can you elaborate on that further, please?
I think Peggy mentioned, we think it might have to do something, you have to go through the state to get it.
yeah, you
It's
would,
not
that
just a
would
local
require a home
decision.
rule petition at the state legislature.
Got it. Thank you very much. That's it.
Thanks, Carlin. Mark,
Hi, just in reference to that previous question, I think that may not be correct. I believe that
could
the residential,
sorry, could you provide your name and address?
sure, Mark Howell, 668 Nurse Hill Road. Thanks. I believe that the Board of Assessors has the ability to implement a residential exemption under existing state law, but check me on that. There's also a senior residential exemption as well as a general residential exception. Both of those require the resident to apply for it, so it's not sort of, set the base and automatic. I'm also really excited to know that I'm being recruited to be one of your emeritus members of the Finance Committee. That was an unexpected thing as a former chairperson. I do have a few comments to offer. It's amazing, how much this is exactly the same as what it was 15 or 20 years ago when I did my 6 years. I think you're on the right track. I really appreciated Christine's presentation about what to do. I was the chair that implemented the first recording clerk. The suggestion I'll make about that is there's a real advantage to having continuity in that position. It's an ideal job for a citizen or even a former town employee, because there's just a lot of jargon and terminology that the clerk will end up explaining to the recorder if it's a new person, and that becomes a training job in and of itself. So I would just offer that as a suggestion. And I have some others along those lines, but I won't belabor that at this point. I'm just
So were you the one that recruited, was it Ruth or Anita?
actually Janet
Anita.
Rothrock was the first person to serve in that role
Who?
prior to either one of them.
Janet, somebody?
Janet Rothrock, right. Okay.
Janet Rothrock, yeah. So
Okay.
maybe she could even be recruited again. But I do think that the use of technology, the last comment I wanted to make along those lines was the struggles with minutes, with packets, and with materials for the meetings is a common struggle that's occurring across all of the town committees. And I think that it should probably be addressed in that way. In the conversations I've been having recently, citizens are noticing that they have trouble accessing the materials. They don't know where to find them, and it's not particularly consistent from one committee to another. And so I see there's a big advantage in trying to establish some consistency. And I think that the Finance Committee is a great place to start. I'd also probably add to the list of possible things that you could delve into, which is financial policies more broadly and publishing those. The return of an August training session is a good one. Tony used to have a binder, Tony Legabo, the former finance, and he would take us through that. It was basically the Finance Committee report, the budgets, and an explanation, and he'd sort of sticky note the thing so that you could use it as reference material. The meeting that Bob was referring to used to be called the Townwide Coordination Meeting. It typically happened in early September, and it was all the committees, including Carlisle's Finance Committee and Select Board, to get some visibility to what was targeted for the warrant. So these are all old ideas that are good ideas, and we just kind of need to get back to some of them. And I look forward to working with all of you to do that. Thanks for taking my comments.
Thanks, Mark. I remember those meetings quite well. Especially the year we had to press Carlisle to get the high school budget done. Amherst? No, okay. Someone's got their hand up, but their name is not correct. Oh, Wilson?
Yeah, hey guys, just a couple quick comments. I
Name
want
and
to take it back.
Name and
Oh,
address.
sorry, Wilson Kerr, 20 Damon Street. The very beginning of this meeting, Chris made some excellent points about this notion of sustainability and some of these requirements that seem to be foisted upon the schools. So I just want to commend Chris for raising those points, or at least raising that subject. And then the second point I wanted to make was just to commend the group regarding the discussion about revenue. Very, very good to hear, and setting some goals for revenue. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Second.
Meeting's adjourned.